The galaxy was a vast and mysterious place, with countless planets and species spread across the stars. But one force reigned supreme, the Galactic Senate. Their influence extended far and wide, and for centuries they had ruled with an iron fist. No one dared oppose them, and no one ever questioned their power. But that was before Earth. In the heart of Earth's capital, the world was buzzing with tension. The Galactic Senate had just sent an unexpected message, a warning, one that was unlike anything Earth had ever received before. The broadcast was simple, but chilling in its tone. We, the Galactic Senate, demand the unconditional surrender of Earth. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your planet. You have 72 hours to submit. The message was broadcasted to every screen on Earth, from the largest cities to the smallest villages. For the first time in humanity's history, the entire world watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just a message, it was an ultimatum. The Galactic Senate had never spoken to Earth directly before. They had always seen humans as insignificant, a small, unimportant species in the vastness of the galaxy. But now, the Senate's voice echoed through the airwaves, demanding that Earth bow to their will. The response from Earth's leaders was swift, but no one was sure what it would be. The world waited, unsure of what would come next. The Senate had made it clear, Earth must surrender, or they would face unimaginable consequences. To most, it seemed like a one-sided battle. The Senate had fleets of warships, advanced weapons, and the power of the galaxy behind them. Earth, on the other hand, had only just begun to explore space. They were far from ready to fight an empire like the Senate. But there was something the Senate had failed to account for: humanity's spirit. In the United Nations War Room, world leaders convened. The air was thick with tension. Earth had just received a message from the most powerful force in the galaxy, and now the fate of the entire planet was in their hands. A tall, stern-looking man, President William Holt, stood at the head of the table. He glanced around at the leaders of the nations, who were all awaiting his response. Some of them were nervous, some angry, but all of them were uncertain. "What are we going to do?" asked one of the leaders. "We can't possibly stand up to them. Their fleet is massive." Holt took a deep breath and looked at the map of the galaxy projected before them. The Senate had fleets scattered across the stars, each one capable of wiping out entire civilizations. Earth was small, weak in comparison, and it seemed like surrender was the only choice. "We won't surrender," Holt said firmly, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We have no choice but to fight." There was a moment of shocked silence before the room erupted into murmurs. The thought of fighting back seemed impossible, but the president had made his decision. "Fighting them is madness," one of the generals said. "They'll destroy us. We have nothing to match their power." But Holt shook his head. "We have something they don't expect. We have our will to survive." The leaders were still unsure. Earth had just begun developing advanced technology, and even their best warships were no match for the Senate's forces. The situation looked hopeless, but Holt knew something that the Senate did not. Humanity would not back down, not even in the face of destruction. "Prepare everything we have," Holt ordered. "Our warships are ready. We will fight, and we will win." The Senate underestimated us, and that's going to be their downfall. The war room was filled with a new sense of purpose. The leaders knew that Earth had no choice but to fight for its survival. The Galactic Senate had given them an ultimatum, but it had also underestimated humanity's determination. Humans had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found a way to survive. Meanwhile, across the stars, the Galactic Senate's Supreme Council sat in their grand chambers, confident that their demands would be met. They believed that humanity, weak and small, would fold under the pressure. After all, how could a species so young, so primitive, stand against the might of the Senate? In the Senate's chambers, Councilor Zorith, a towering figure with dark, piercing eyes, stood before the others. He was the one who had proposed the ultimatum to Earth, and he watched with satisfaction as the message went out. "They will surrender," Zorath said with conviction. "Their leaders will cave in. This is the end of their defiance." The others nodded, their faces cold and confident. But as they watched the feed from Earth, something caught Zorath's attention, a faint flicker on the planet's surface. It was subtle, but it was there. A strange energy was rising from Earth, unlike anything the Senate had ever seen before. Zorath narrowed his eyes, a feeling of unease washing over him. "There is something different about this planet," he murmured to himself. "They are not what we thought." He dismissed the thought, focusing on the inevitable victory that awaited them. Humanity would submit. They always did. But deep down, Zorath couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The galaxy's most powerful empire was about to face a threat they never saw coming: humanity's wrath. The tension across Earth was palpable. Cities that had once bustled with normal life were now under curfew. People stayed indoors, their eyes glued to their screens, awaiting a response from their leaders. The Galactic Senate's demand had been clear, and the world knew the clock was ticking. Humanity was facing the most daunting challenge in its history. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, President Holt addressed the world through a live broadcast. His face was calm, but his words carried the weight of a decision that could mean the end, or the beginning, of humanity's existence. He knew that every human being on the planet was watching. The stakes had never been higher. "My fellow humans," Holt began, his voice steady but strong. "The Galactic Senate has issued an ultimatum, demanding that we surrender or face destruction. They believe we are weak, insignificant, and that we will bow to their will." There was a pause as Holt took a deep breath. The world was hanging on his every word. "But they are wrong. We are not weak. We are not afraid. We are humanity. For centuries, we have fought, struggled, and survived against the odds. We have faced impossible challenges and emerged victorious. This time will be no different." His words resonated across Earth. The fear that had once gripped the planet began to dissolve, replaced by a newfound sense of resolve. Humanity was not going to give up without a fight. "We will not surrender," Holt continued. "We will defend our planet with everything we have. And we will make the Galactic Senate regret underestimating us." As the broadcast ended, the world erupted. People in the streets cheered, some in disbelief, others with a fierce determination. The response was clear: Earth was not going to back down. The leaders of Earth, knowing that the Senate would not wait long to strike, began preparing for the war to come. Earth's military had already been developing advanced warships, but they were far from ready to take on the might of the Galactic Senate. Yet President Holt was determined to give humanity a fighting chance. In secret war rooms across the globe, generals, scientists, and engineers worked around the clock. The space fleets were hastily modified, weapons were upgraded, and every resource was mobilized. The message was clear: Earth was going to fight back. Meanwhile, the Galactic Senate watched Earth's response with amusement, until their confidence began to waver. In the Senate's Grand Council chamber, Zorath, the mastermind behind the ultimatum, stood before his colleagues, a smug look on his face. "They will surrender. It is inevitable. Their leaders have no choice," he said, confident that humanity would bow to the Senate's power. But as the days passed, reports from the front lines began to emerge. There were signs that Earth was not as helpless as the Senate had assumed. The first human warships were deployed, and their designs were unlike anything the Senate had ever seen. Earth's engineers had managed to create advanced technology far beyond what anyone had expected. Zorath's confidence began to falter. The Senate had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. As the warships assembled, the first skirmishes took place in space, small but intense battles that saw humanity's fleets surprisingly capable of putting up a fight. The Senate was taken aback. Their intelligence had told them that humans were primitive, weak, and unprepared. But these new warships, with their advanced weaponry and unexpected tactical brilliance, were giving the Senate something they hadn't anticipated: a challenge. Back on Earth, President Holt watched the news of the first battles unfold. He had known this would happen. He knew the Galactic Senate would not back down easily. But he also knew that humanity's greatest strength was its resilience, its refusal to be crushed under pressure. Keep pushing, he ordered his military commanders. Show them what we're made of. We are not going to stop until they understand that Earth cannot be ruled by anyone but us. The battles continued, with Earth's fleet slowly but surely making its presence known. It was no longer a question of whether Earth could win. It was about how much the Galactic Senate would pay for their underestimation of humanity. Back on the Senate homeworld, Zorath paced nervously. The reports were flooding in, and they were not good. The human warships were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. A sense of unease spread through the Senate's ranks, and for the first time in centuries, they began to fear the unthinkable. "We have made a grave mistake," Zorath muttered to himself, staring at the holographic projections of the human fleet. "We did not understand them. We thought they were weak." In the Senate's chambers, the other council members were beginning to murmur among themselves. Their leader had been so sure, so confident that the humans would submit. But now, it seemed that the situation was far from simple. "Perhaps we should reconsider our stance," one of the councilors suggested, but Zorath dismissed the thought. "No," he snapped. "We cannot show weakness. We will crush them. They are nothing compared to the might of the Galactic Senate." But even as he spoke those words, doubt began to creep into his mind. The unexpected resistance from Earth was not something he had prepared for. The humans, despite their seeming lack of resources, were proving to be a formidable force. Back on Earth, President Holt received news of the first victory. A human warship had successfully disabled a Senate destroyer in a skirmish. It wasn't a massive win, but it was a statement. Humanity was fighting back, and they weren't going to stop until they had their victory. "Tell the fleet to keep going," Holt said. "This is just the beginning." As the battle continued, humanity's resolve only strengthened. They had proven that they would not bow to the Galactic Senate, and they had shown that their fighting spirit was stronger than anyone had anticipated. The Galactic Senate had made a critical error. They had underestimated the power of Earth, and that was a mistake they were about to regret. The situation was now undeniable. Humanity had awakened a force in the universe no one had anticipated. As the days passed, more reports from the battlefront poured in. Earth's warships were beginning to outmaneuver and outgun the Galactic Senate's fleet in ways that no one thought possible. The first wave of combat had left the Senate's forces stunned, and now humanity was on the offensive. Back on Earth, President Holt sat in a war room, surrounded by his military advisors and top scientists. They were looking over a holographic map of the conflict, displaying battle zones and areas of interest across the galaxy. Earth's forces had launched attacks in multiple sectors, surprising the Senate with their precision and the sheer scale of their counteroffensive. "Keep pushing," Holt ordered with unwavering authority. "The Senate thought we would bend, but we're showing them that Earth will not be cowed." The warships Earth had deployed were equipped with technology unlike anything the Galactic Senate had encountered. The ships were smaller, faster, and more agile. And while the Senate's fleet relied on massive destroyers and cruisers, Earth's warships had an edge in terms of maneuverability and advanced weapons. The tactical brilliance of Earth's commanders had taken the Senate by surprise. The Senate's initial arrogance had now turned to frustration. Their once superior fleet was being outsmarted by a race they had dismissed as primitive. Zorath, the head of the Senate's War Council, could no longer hide his growing panic. He paced back and forth in his private chamber, the sounds of his footsteps echoing in the empty room. "How did this happen?" Zorath muttered under his breath, his mind racing. "They should have been easy to defeat. We had them cornered." The Senate's higher command had underestimated the humans for far too long. In their eagerness to crush them, they failed to see the true nature of humanity. Earth's fighters were not just strong, they were clever. and they would fight until their last breath. Zorath clenched his fists in anger, knowing that every defeat was chipping away at the Senate's dominance. He called for an emergency meeting with the Senate's counselors, hoping to find a way to turn the tide of the war. Meanwhile, back on Earth, humanity's hope was growing stronger by the hour. Every small victory in space was celebrated, but it wasn't just the victories that made the difference. It was the unshakable spirit of the people. From the streets of New York to the hills of Australia, humanity was united in a common cause: survival. Soldiers, pilots, and civilians worked together, sharing resources, coordinating efforts, and supporting their forces. Humanity was learning quickly, adapting to the harsh realities of intergalactic war. Scientists in research labs worked day and night to create new weapons, while engineers developed new spacecraft technology. No one was willing to sit back and wait. The Senate made a grave mistake. President Holt said in a broadcast to the public, "They thought we would surrender. They thought they could break us. But now, they're learning the truth. Humanity stands together, and we will not fall." Across the planet, people cheered. They believed in Holt's words. It wasn't just a war. It was a fight for the survival of the human race. And the longer the Galactic Senate resisted, the more certain it became that Earth would not yield. As the war raged on, Earth's forces began to push into the heart of Senate-controlled space. The Senate had once believed it was untouchable, but now, their empire was crumbling under the weight of humanity's determination. The Senate's once unchallenged fleets now found themselves on the defensive, as Earth's warships continued to strike with surgical precision. Every battle, every skirmish, seemed to favor Earth, and with each passing day, humanity's forces grew stronger. The Galactic Senate had no choice but to regroup and reassess their strategy. But the question remained: would they be able to stop humanity's advance? Back in the Senate's command center, the leaders were in disarray. Zorath paced in front of a massive holographic projection, showing the steadily advancing human forces. His mind was clouded with frustration, unable to comprehend how things had gone so wrong. "The humans cannot be this strong. They must be getting help," he muttered, his thoughts turning to the possibility of outside intervention. But who would ally with them? No one would risk entering the Senate. The Senate's intelligence reports revealed a disturbing trend. Humanity had not only held its own but had become more aggressive. Earth's warships were now entering the Senate's core territories. This was no longer a small skirmish. This was a full-scale war, and the Senate was losing ground. Zorath, one of the counselors, spoke up, a note of desperation in his voice. "We cannot ignore this any longer. We must consider peace talks. The human forces are relentless, and they are showing no signs of stopping." Zorath's eyes narrowed as he glared at the counselor. "We cannot negotiate with them. They are a threat to the very foundation of the Senate. If we bow to them now, it will be the end of everything we've worked for." But even as he spoke, he knew that the tide was turning. The once mighty Galactic Senate was beginning to realize that their rule was in jeopardy. They had underestimated humanity, an error that would prove to be their undoing. As the battles raged on, the Senate's grip on power continued to slip away. Humanity's rise had been swift, and the Galactic Senate, once so confident in its superiority, was now fighting to survive. And President Holt, he knew that this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and the enemy might still have tricks up their sleeve. But for the first time in a long while, humanity's chances of winning felt real. The stage was set for a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The Galactic Senate had made its mistake, and now humanity was about to show them just how wrong they were. The war had been raging for months now, and both sides had seen their fair share of victories and losses. But as the days passed, the Galactic Senate's desperation grew. They had never imagined that humanity, a race they once considered inferior, would rise up to challenge their vast empire. Now their forces were scattered across the galaxy, retreating in the face of Earth's unstoppable warships. In the heart of the Senate's command center, the leaders were convening for an emergency meeting. Zorath stood before a vast holographic display, his fists clenched in frustration as he watched the steady encroachment of human forces. His once confident demeanor had given way to desperation, and it was becoming more and more evident that the Senate was on the brink of collapse. "We cannot keep fighting like this," one of the high-ranking officers, Jorath, said, his voice filled with panic. "Humanity's warships are outpacing us. Their tactics are unlike anything we've encountered." Zorath looked at Jorath, his face twisted with anger. "You think I don't know that?" He snapped. "We underestimated them. Now we're paying the price." The Senate's once mighty fleet was now scattered, with ships lost in skirmishes or retreating to the far reaches of their territories. Earth's warships, agile and well-coordinated, had already breached several key sectors of the Senate's space, and despite their technological superiority, the Senate's forces were beginning to show signs of cracking under the pressure. "We need reinforcements," Jorath continued, his voice desperate. "We need to call upon the Outer Rim fleets." Zorath hesitated. The Outer Rim fleets had always been loyal to the Senate, but they were far from their primary stronghold. Calling them would take time, and the Senate didn't have the luxury of time. Humanity's forces were gaining ground by the hour. "No," Zorath replied firmly. "We can't rely on them. The human fleet is already in the Outer Rim. The Senate's resources are stretched thin. We need to end this quickly." "End it?" Jorath scoffed. "How? The humans are too strong. We've tried everything. They're adapting faster than we can." Zorath's eyes narrowed. "Then we have no choice. We will make them an offer they can't refuse." Across the galaxy, President Holt was still at the helm of humanity's resistance, his resolve unshaken by the Senate's threats. Earth's forces had pushed into deeper parts of Senate-controlled space, and morale among the troops had never been higher. The Senate had made one crucial error after another, and Holt knew it was time to press their advantage. "Holt, the Senate is on the verge of collapse," General Harris said, speaking over a secure communication channel. "But we need to be careful. They're not going to go down without a fight. And they're starting to get desperate." "We've seen desperation before," Holt replied calmly. "It makes them more dangerous, but it also makes them predictable." The strategy Holt had implemented was simple but effective. Keep the Senate off balance. Humanity's warships had been striking in unexpected places, using guerrilla tactics to disrupt the Senate's communications and supply lines. Earth's fleets had been systematically cutting off the Senate's resources, forcing them into a corner. "Once they're backed into a corner, they'll have no choice but to offer us peace," Holt said, a cold glint in his eyes. "And when they do, we'll make sure their surrender is as humiliating as their actions deserve." Back in the Senate's war room, Zorath paced back and forth, weighing his options. He knew that his empire was crumbling, but the idea of surrender was unthinkable. The Senate had spent centuries building its dominion over the galaxy, and now it seemed as if everything was unraveling before his eyes. The very idea of surrendering to a race they had once considered beneath them was an affront to everything the Senate stood for. But as he looked at the reports pouring in, humanity's continued advances, their refusal to relent, Zorath realized something he hadn't fully acknowledged before. The Senate could lose this war. They could lose everything. He turned to his advisors, his voice cold. "Prepare a message for Earth. We'll offer them terms." The advisors exchanged nervous glances, unsure if this was the right course of action. But Zorath's tone brooked no argument. The Senate was out of time, and Zorath knew they had to act quickly. The message was sent to Earth, an official communique from the Galactic Senate offering a ceasefire. But it wasn't a simple surrender. Instead, it was a proposition, a series of demands meant to preserve the Senate's power while granting humanity a limited victory. Zorath hoped that by offering the humans a glimpse of power, he could somehow salvage the Senate's prestige. But Holt wasn't fooled. Back on Earth, Holt and his team watched the Senate's message with a mixture of disdain and amusement. The offer was filled with empty promises, with the Senate attempting to save face by suggesting they could negotiate peace terms. But Holt knew better. This was just another ploy to buy time. "They think we'll settle for less," Holt said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of finality. "But there's no going back now. We've come too far." Holt made his decision swiftly. He wouldn't accept the Senate's terms. Instead, humanity would push forward and demand more. The Senate had begun to crumble, and Earth would be the one to finish the job. The war wasn't over, but it was closer than it had ever been. The Galactic Senate's desperation had set the stage for humanity's final move, and President Holt, standing tall with the weight of the world on his shoulders, knew that Earth was on the brink of victory. But Zorath, still clinging to the remnants of his empire, was about to realize that the Senate's fate was sealed. The final clash was coming, and there would be no mercy. The Senate's offer had come, but it was no more than a last-ditch effort to save their empire. Zorath had hoped that the humans would be willing to accept a peace agreement on the Senate's terms, but deep down, he knew he had already lost. The message was clear. Earth had made it clear they wouldn't be swayed by the Senate's games. Humanity had tasted victory, and now they were hungry for more. President Holt was in his private command center, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. His fingers traced the movement of Earth's fleets, each one a harbinger of the Senate's impending collapse. The Senate had underestimated them from the very beginning, and now they were about to pay the price. Holt had played a long game, allowing the Senate to make their mistakes, but now the moment had arrived to deal the final blow. "General Harris, prepare for the next phase," Holt said, his voice steady as ever. "We've given them every opportunity to back down. Now we finish this." Harris nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "Understood, Mr. President. Our fleets are ready for the next step. We'll move to neutralize their key systems." Holt didn't need to say more. The next phase of humanity's strategy was already in motion. They would strike the Senate's heart, the capital planet, and force them into a corner so tight that the Senate would have no choice but to surrender completely. It was no longer about negotiating for peace. It was about ensuring humanity's dominance over the galaxy. Meanwhile, on the Senate's flagship, Zorath could feel the walls closing in. His advisors had grown quiet, their faces pale as they watched the progress of humanity's fleets. The Senate's defenses were faltering, and there was no reinforcements in sight. Desperation was becoming a bitter reality. Zorath's mind raced. He had seen the reports from the front lines. The human forces were more organized, more determined than ever. They were relentless, and every attempt the Senate made to push them back was met with swift retaliation. Zorath was no fool. He knew that Earth's demands were not negotiable anymore. There was no room for compromise. The Senate had already failed. As he sat in the war room, the silence was deafening. His military strategists, once so confident in their ability to crush this rebellion, now had their heads bowed, unable to offer any real solutions. The Senate's ships were scattered, their once grand fleets nothing more than a shadow of their former strength. "We have nothing left," Zorath, one of Zorath's most trusted commanders, spoke quietly. "Humanity will not accept peace on our terms. We've lost. We are on the verge of extinction." Zorath's gaze darkened as he stared out at the endless void of space. His empire was crumbling before him, and his people, once the most powerful in the galaxy, were now reduced to begging for mercy from the humans. It was a bitter pill to swallow. "The humans won't stop until they've taken everything," Zorath muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "They are relentless, but they haven't seen the true power of the Senate yet. We will fight to the bitter end. We have no choice." Zorath shook his head. "Fighting will only delay the inevitable. Our fleets are outnumbered. Our resources are stretched too thin. We can't keep up." Zorath stood from his chair, his eyes filled with a fiery determination. "Then we make them an offer they can't refuse. we have one final card to play. The Senate's message to Earth was simple: surrender or face utter annihilation. Zorath sent out a direct transmission to President Holt, his words sharp and defiant. "President Holt," Zorath began, his voice cold and unwavering, "you may have won every battle, but you have not yet won the war. The Senate still holds vast power. We will not yield, and we will not surrender. You will bow before us, or we will unleash the full fury of our fleets upon Earth." He paused, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair. "You will learn that the Senate does not negotiate with the weak. The galaxy belongs to us. Your defeat is inevitable." On Earth, Holt received the message. The arrogance of the Senate was as palpable as ever, but Holt had already made up his mind. The Senate's last-ditch effort to intimidate humanity would not work. In fact, Holt had already prepared for this moment. He sat in front of his command team, a sense of calm settling over him despite the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. "Prepare the warships," Holt ordered. "It's time to end this once and for all." The final blow would come swiftly. Earth's fleets had already infiltrated critical sectors of the Senate's empire, and they had a clear path to victory. With the Senate's own message serving as the final ultimatum, humanity would ensure that their dominance was cemented. No more deals. No more compromises. "We've come too far to back down now," Holt said quietly. "The Senate will fall." As the transmission ended, Holt knew this was no longer a war for survival. It was a war for the future of the galaxy, and humanity had already claimed its place as the new rulers. Zorath sat in the cold silence of the Senate's war room, his hands trembling slightly as he gazed out into the starry abyss. The Senate's once proud fleets were in retreat, scattered across the galaxy, and there was no hope of reinforcements. All their plans, their grand strategies, had crumbled before humanity's indomitable will. The humans, who had once been nothing more than a small, insignificant species on a distant planet, had now become a force to be reckoned with, and Zorath knew that their demands were not negotiable. The Senate was broken. The galactic empire that had dominated the stars for centuries was on the verge of collapse. Their fleets were shattered, their resources drained, and the humans were closing in. The Senate had failed, and now they faced the consequences of their actions. In the Senate's capital, a massive warship drifted ominously, its vast size almost dwarfing the planet beneath it. It was the final bastion of the Senate, a symbol of their remaining power, but Zorath knew it would not be enough. Not against the fury of humanity's warships. "I've made my decision," Zorath said, his voice low and filled with a resigned finality. "Prepare the warship. We will face them one last time, and we will not go down without a fight." Zorath, ever the loyal commander, stepped forward. "But, Zorath, we are outnumbered. We have no chance. The humans have overwhelming strength. We're asking for certain death." Zorath clenched his fists, a fire of determination still burning within him. "We fight because it is the only choice left. Our people may be defeated, but we will not go quietly into the void. The Senate will fall, but they will remember the cost of defying us." On Earth, President Holt had received the Senate's final message, the words still echoing in his mind. "You will bow before us, or we will unleash the full fury of our fleets upon Earth." It was a threat, a last, desperate grasp for power, but Holt was no fool. He knew that humanity had reached a tipping point, and this was no longer about defense. This was about wiping out the Senate's ability to fight back, ensuring that they would never rise again. The message had been received, and Holt was ready to strike the final blow. He turned to his commanders. "This is it," he said, his voice strong and unyielding. "We will strike the Senate's final fortress, and we will show them what happens when they underestimate humanity. No more negotiations, no more concessions. This ends today." The fleet was ready. Humanity's warships, massive and unrelenting, gathered at the edge of the Senate's empire. With each passing hour, the Senate's final strongholds fell, and their defenses crumbled like sand beneath the tide. Holt's fleets were a tidal wave, unstoppable, and they were closing in on the Senate's capital. The final battle was at hand. Zoreth's warship, the last of its kind, moved into position around the capital planet. The crew was preparing for a fight to the death, knowing full well that this would be their last stand. The once great Senate now found itself on the defensive, surrounded by the very humans they had tried to crush. Zoreth stood at the helm of his flagship, staring out at the planet below. He could feel the weight of their inevitable defeat. "We've fought so hard," Zoreth murmured, his voice tinged with bitterness. But it wasn't enough. The humans, they were too strong. The final battle erupted in the skies above the Senate's capital, a terrifying spectacle of firepower and destruction. Humanity's fleets moved in like a swarm of vengeful hornets, their warships launching wave after wave of devastating attacks. The Senate's defenses, already weakened by the relentless assault, faltered under the weight of humanity's fury. President Holt's voice echoed over the comms. "This is it. We will wipe them out. No mercy. We end this now." The humans were relentless, their firepower unstoppable. The Senate's warships exploded in a shower of flames, their mighty hulls shattered under the force of humanity's assault. Zoreth's flagship was one of the last to hold out, but it too was eventually overwhelmed. The once proud vessel, now a relic of a forgotten era, was slowly torn apart by the sheer force of humanity's might. On Earth, the warships remained poised, waiting for the inevitable signal. President Holt stood with his team, his expression grim but resolute. Humanity had won. The Senate had fallen, but there was no joy in victory. Humanity had been through too much, too many battles, too many sacrifices. The war had cost them dearly. The death toll had been high, and there was no going back to what life had been before. But the victory was undeniable. The Senate was no more. As the final remnants of the Senate's forces were destroyed, Zoreth stood alone on the bridge of his flagship. The war was over, but he had no peace. The weight of the Senate's fall hung heavy on his shoulders. "I never thought this day would come," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "We were once masters of the galaxy, but now we're nothing." He glanced out at the stars, the same stars that had once been symbols of their greatness. Now they were silent witnesses to their fall. As Zoreth's flagship finally succumbed to the unstoppable human onslaught, the galaxy was forever changed. The Senate was no more. Humanity had risen to take their place, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy had changed forever. The once mighty Galactic Senate, a symbol of power and dominance across countless worlds, had been wiped out in a matter of days. The humans had shown their might, their resolve, and their ability to fight for what they believed in. The Senate had fallen, but it was not without one final moment of clarity, a moment that would echo throughout history. Zoreth's warship, now nothing more than a drifting husk in the empty void of space, had been the last of the Senate's grand fleet. It had been surrounded by the unstoppable might of humanity's warships, their weapons firing relentlessly as they tore through the defenses. The flagship's once proud hull now burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Zoreth stood at the bridge, the ship's destruction inevitable. His mind wandered back to the days before the war, before humanity had proven their worth. He remembered the Senate's haughty dismissals, the arrogance with which they had brushed off Earth's warnings. "Humanity is too insignificant to be a threat," they had said. They had dismissed humanity's rise as nothing more than a blip in the grand cosmic scheme. But now, Zoreth knew, humanity was the force shaping the galaxy's future. "I failed them," he murmured under his breath, his voice carrying the weight of the past few days' events. "I failed us." The bridge was a scene of chaos. The warship's crew had either abandoned their posts or had already been killed in the onslaught. Zoreth was the last living being aboard. The end was imminent, but as the flames of destruction began to consume the ship, Zoreth had one last transmission sent out into the void, a final message to the galaxy and to humanity. He sat down at the communications console, his fingers trembling as he activated the transmission. The voice that echoed across the stars was not one of triumph, but one of final acceptance. "Humanity," Zorith began, his voice steady despite the ship's inevitable collapse. "We made a grave mistake. We believed that our power, our status, would keep us safe. We thought we could control the galaxy. And we were wrong." The message played out across the universe, reaching every corner of the galaxy. Ships, colonies, and even the most remote outposts of the once mighty Senate listened in. "We underestimated you," Zorith continued, his tone softening. "We thought you were a threat we could crush with ease. But you are not like us. You do not bend. You do not break. And because of that, you have proven that you are worthy of this galaxy." The warship's systems began to flicker, and the crew's final moments were slipping away. But Zorith had one last thing to say. "To the humans who have caused our downfall, I leave you with this. You are the future of this galaxy. Our last words are this: we surrender. The Senate is no more. You have won." The final transmission ended, but the message reverberated throughout the galaxy. Across countless worlds, it was heard by those who had once been part of the Senate's empire. It was heard by the rebels who had fought against the Senate's tyranny. It was heard by every sentient being who had ever doubted humanity's power. The warship exploded into a brilliant ball of light, the force of its destruction shaking nearby ships and sending shockwaves through the galaxy. The Senate's last remnant was gone. The flames of their empire were extinguished, and from the ashes rose a new era, a new hope for the galaxy. Back on Earth, President Holt stood before the massive windows in the war room, staring out at the stars. The final battle had been fought, and the Senate's empire was no more. The humans had proven their strength, but there was no celebration. The cost had been too high, and the scars of war would take time to heal. But the message from the Senate's final moments was clear. Humanity was the future. "We've done it," President Holt said quietly, his voice heavy with the burden of victory. "But we must be cautious. Power like this can change everything. We must remember who we are." The room was silent, save for the hum of the command center's monitors. Humanity had won, but the responsibility of the galaxy's future now rested in their hands. There were still countless worlds to rebuild, countless lives to be rebuilt, and the work of peace was just beginning. But for now, humanity stood victorious. They had faced the impossible, and they had triumphed. The Senate had been crushed under the weight of their own arrogance, and humanity had emerged stronger than ever. The Galactic Senate was gone. The galaxy was now in the hands of those who had once been powerless. The humans who had been underestimated, dismissed, and threatened had proven themselves to be the most formidable force in the galaxy. As the stars burned bright above Earth, one thing was certain: the age of the Galactic Senate was over, and the age of humanity had just begun.